Today we are at the beautiful 50 West Brew Pub. Boom, baby. Love that. Right across the street from the 50 West production facility. We're getting ready to get rolling on this brew day, but we're gonna be putting together the mash tun first. So let me give you a look at that. We're looking at a 10-barrel system. I'm almost positive it's a 10-barrel system, but we'll ask the fellows when they get back over here. We'll take a look at this and we'll see how it's all put together. Let's take a look at the mash tun. So they have this all the way broken down. You can see that there's one louder screen in there and that we're gonna be putting the other two back in before we get rolling here on the mash. And here we are up at the top of the mash tun. Get these doors open. We'll take a little peek in here. As I said, you can see that there's one screen in there right now, but we're gonna build the rest of that out. You can see spray ball, temperature probe. There's a single port at the bottom that we're going to be doing both our Verloff recirculation and our louder with. So we'll get this built and we'll get rolling on this mashing.
I haven't mashed in at the pub in a very long time.
Yeah, there's a manual one, right?
Yeah.
In there, boy.
That's the only rule with the US is no rakes.
Yeah. Doesn't matter how big we're brewing.
Yeah.
Not a rake inside.
Yeah, we're not.
I did a little intro stuff on this beforehand, so yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, there's no rakes in there. It's just getting in there and getting it done.
This is a lot more brewing my feel.
Absolutely.
How often do you have two people helping with the mashing over here? It's usually solo, one
Since
point.
I've been over here, it's been pretty infrequent, except collabs.
Yeah, collabs. I mean, I got to the point where I used to have help, and then one of our old brewers became a brewer over at the production brewery.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of learned that there were very few instances where I actually ever needed help to mash in.
Yeah, it sure made it easier.
It is nice.
Yeah, well, and then it became the thing. Every time I asked somebody, they were all busy over there, and I was like, well, I don't want to wait 15 minutes, so I'm just going to mash in. So I learned, I was like, I really don't. I mean, there are some beers when we used to not do double batches of Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
I had to have someone help me because it was like over 1,000 pounds of grain.
Yeah.
But now that we split batch it, it's a lot more manageable.
For sure.
Still
So
not
we're on
efficient,
a 10-barrel system here.
Yes, sir.
And so when you're mashing in, so we're doing Schwartz beer today. What's that starting gravity going to be on this beer? Ballpark.
I think we're shooting for around 11.
Okay.
Is it 11 and a half, 11.4? We're going to have to cut this. I'll check.
So it's not massive. That's okay. We can come back to it. The main thing I'm thinking about is how it's not like we're going to be overloading this today.
Not at all.
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
This brew house performs really well on beers that are around. From what I think, anything that's like 15 Plato or lower, this brew house does a really good job. Anything that's like 18 Plato or higher, it tanks on efficiency. I mean, there are points where me and Jake have brewed on the system, and there are bags of grains that we've added that it's like, oh, this literally added no sugar at all. I mean, it's going to add some sort of flavor.
Some stuff.
Yeah, but from an efficiency standpoint, a complete waste of grain.
Sure. So that's cool. And so you mentioned, let's talk about kind of strike temp and mash thickness on this. So what's the mash temperature we're looking to hit at the end of this?
In the 148 to 150 range
Yeah.
for our mash rest here after we're mashed all the way in with everything.
Yeah, so 148 to 150 is what we're shooting for. And we want it to be drier. We don't want a lot of residual sugar left in this beer.
Yep.
Because we like our Schwartz beer to be, to use a popular word, we want it to be as crisp as possible.
Sure.
While also being malt forward.
Sure.
And then we're our normal quarts per pound ratio, which is how I was trained, is we shoot for right around 1.2 to 1.3, 1.2 to 1.3 quarts per pound of grain. On this one, we're closer to 1.8. So this is going to be a very thin mash. I mean, to give you an idea, on a beer normally like this, we would be adding about 225 gallons of strike water.
Yep.
But today we're adding 275.
Okay.
So that's an additional 50 gallons, and that's also to encourage a drier finish.
Love it. And so we've got a bunch of floor malted Bohemian pills in this. Threw me off because we are using we are using pre-milled for this, and one thing I didn't realize is that the string on top of this is white and green as opposed to white and red. I'm assuming that's tied to the fact that it's pre-milled. How long do you guys usually, because I mean, you have the production house across the street, which is obviously using all whole malt, and then you're milling and everything over there.
Yes.
Yeah. So how often, I mean, you're turning wort over here a few times a week, though.
Yeah, I mean, right now, being our slower season, our average is a little bit lower, but I mean, overall throughout the year, we average at least 2 brews a week over here.
Yep.
So 2 brews and 2 packs, that's kind of the goal. So yeah, we're still pumping out a lot of beer out of this facility.
Sure. All right, and then I have these 2 specialty buckets down here, and then I have 2 more malts to measure out for you once you get those in.
Okay, great.
Actually, if you want to go ahead and grab those buckets, I'll save this last bag of base malt.
There you go. And then I might have you pull those up because I have the numbers typed into my phone, and I'm recording on there.
Okay. Is this 2 or 3? Or is this a blend of both?
Yeah, this has got a few of the different.
Nice.
I think it's got the choc.
Pale choc.
Called a choc.
Pale chocolate.
Yeah, it's just the Munich and the Carafa left that's coming in after this.
So yeah, we're adding.
And I think it was 12 on both, but I want to double check. Oh, it was 12 and 10.
Yeah.
12 and 10. I'm not sure which was which though.
And normally we would use Carafa Special when we just want to add a little color.
Yep.
But on these, we purposely use the Husk Carafa.
Yeah.
Because we want a little bit of that, like, tannic addition from the roasted malt.
Yep.
We want a little bit of that coffee kind of bitterness.
And Jake, can you double check the measurement on the Munich here real quick?
Actually, the Munich one, I'm going to take that whole
Oh,
bag.
you got the whole thing? Okay.
We had 2 parcels that equal the whole bag.
Okay.
Yeah, Jenny.
And then, or the Carafa. That's the only other number I need.
Okay.
Is that the 3?
Yeah, the Carafa 3. That might have been 10 off the top of my head, but I can't remember.
I think it's
6.
6.
Carafa 3 is 12.
Okay.
Yeah, 12 and then 10 on 2.
All right, so there's 6 pounds of the type 3, and then I'm topping up to 10.
That's all we have.
Yeah, so that's
Special.
type 3.
So this
and
is
then
type 3, and there's 6 pounds.
6 pounds. So then we're adding the difference with 2, correct?
Okay.
So yeah.
And I'm taking it up to 12.
Well, type 3, one's just the special ones.
Yep. But I'm taking it up to 12 total, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. On 3, we're looking at 12 total. That's the brew pub way.
That's right.
You use what you got.
Yeah.
Jenny.
I dug for so long last night trying to find them.
Yeah. I really want to do a kitchen sink beer soon, but we've gotten really good at not over ordering malt the way I used to.
Oh yeah, that is thin.
Oh yeah, it's a super thin mash.
Yeah. And you said that's closer to 1.8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Closer to 1.8.
And that's quarts per pound. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do the best I can to convert some of these things and edit. So for all of my metric folks out there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So plenty thin.
Oh yeah. I mean, sorry, I just splashed all over.
You're good.
Yeah. I mean, it's 6 and a little. There's a little bit of
Yep.
at the bottom, but
Nice.
not too much.
Nice. It is funny how much easier it is to mix when it's that much thinner.
Oh
You know
yeah.
what I mean, yeah.
There's a reason I offered to mix. You know.
There's a reason he offered to stir. That's what he said. Awesome. All right, so we are fully mashed in right now. How long is our rest on this?
We're going to do a 40-minute mash rest.
Okay, sweet. I may have mentioned this before, but one of the things that is nice about making some beer that is not yellow, it just smells so much different. You're used to making so much yellow beer these days between hazy and whatnot. So anyways, we have a 40-minute rest on this, and we're going to get rolling on the rest of the stuff. So you are filling your kettle right now with water. Talk to me about this water. Where's this coming from?
That's city water that goes through a carbon filter.
Yep.
Yep.
Is it hot or cold?
That's cold. That's ground temp.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty cold right now.
I bet.
Because it's 19 degrees outside.
And then so you're going to be heating that in here, and then functionally you're going to be pushing that over to your HLT because the kettle has more oomph
Correct.
than your HLT does.
Yeah, with a 40-minute rest, we should have more than enough time to top off the kettle.
Yep.
Set it to the sparge temp that we're shooting for, like around 170, and then we'll shove it over into our HLT so we can begin sparge while laundering. It's
always interesting to see how people utilize their equipment to get different things done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, this was all built out of necessity because we had an HLT with 2 individual heating elements in it. One went out, and I couldn't wait to not brew for it to get fixed. So I was like, well, the first brewery I ever worked at, it was the same exact setup. It was all converted dairy equipment except for the kettle.
Yep.
And we had a horizontal holding vessel for our HLT. Yep. So we would heat up all the water. So I was like, I can implement that here. So I just had to be really on top of my timing. So as soon as I was done mashing in, I'm filling up that kettle so I can get it heated up and get it over to the HLT.
Nice. Nice. Very cool. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3 fermenters. Bright tank right here. We've got some barrels. And then 4, 5, 6 as far as the breakdown on this whole thing. And as we talked about before, we have the HLT right over here next to the rest of the brew house. And we're kind of piggybacking, heating up that sparge water in the kettle in order to fill up that HLT. Sweet. All right, so we're ready to start Vorloff, correct?
Yeah, we're going to be Vorloffing here with our brews. We run typically around a 25-minute Vorloff. With it being a very manual, no flow meters, it's a lot of eyeballing it and figuring out the flow rate, so we're not pulling too hard to compact the mash too much. But it also gives us a proper Vorloff to blend and homogenize the rest of the mash and get enough of a mash bed set so we can get a good extraction when we start sparging. So
for sure,
we run through the grant here. So really, we just go ahead and I like to do one big open at the beginning in case any grain has settled.
Yep.
But then I just kind of throttle it back, and my gauge is about a 5 minutes round up to about the 18-20 gallon mark until our pump kicks on. And it just takes it all the way through up and just will recirculate it back to the top of the mash.
Nice. All right, so we're going to take a little dive into this grant here. Very cool. I've not worked with one like this before. Some of the grants I've worked with are just kind of like, I don't know, just vessels. But this one is interesting because it does have a float switch, something that I've not played with, and where I was looking for my markings. Okay. You can see it's very light, but right along the back wall is kind of etched in. That's giving some different volume measurements. And so we can see that we're not blasting full speed with this butterfly valve right here, which is allowing the wort to come down and then start filling up the grant. And so can you tell me about this float right here and what that does?
Yeah,
and
so
how
there's
that
actually 2 floats on this mechanism. The one on the top is going to be our high volume. So once the top float reaches, or once the wort level reaches the top float, it begins to push the bobber up. And there's a simple switch mechanism that once that bobber touches it, that turns on and activates our pump to recirculate this. Okay. And then on the inverse, as the level goes down, that bottom float that's pushing up because of the liquid, it now drops down once the liquid level gets below and hits the off switch, basically, to turn that pump off so the pump will never be running dry while we're recirculating the Vorloff.
Nice. This is slick. I'm looking forward to seeing that go. The main thing, like you just said, we're generally looking at about a 20-minute recirc on something like this?
20 to 25. Basically, once I see where the wort is pulling clear, we're not having any issues, and everything up top looks good. Another thing we do kind of have to wait on, because we share the boil kettle as our hot water source, I have to wait until that reaches our sparge temperature so I can empty out the brew kettle and make it available for wort to be sent over.
For sure.
And lathered over.
And what temp are we going up to?
I shoot up to about 174. I like to sparge around 170 to 172. I know we get a small amount of loss just transferring it in, and then over the course of the hour or so that we sparge, we do have a slight decrease in that temperature due to the heating elements not keeping it on par. So yeah, around the 170 to 172 is what we're hunting for all of our sparge temps all the way through.
Nice. And then how long is that lauter going to take?
Lauter, we time it out and run the pace between about an hour and 15 to an hour and a half. It's something that we can adjust. Again, if we're pretty comfortable that the mash itself is not compacted and it's flowing pretty smooth, we can amp it up a little bit to increase the speed.
Okay, so pump just kicked on for this, and you can see along that float in the back, you might be able to see that the liquid is starting to drop.
I did that one time when I was
nice and slowly, and then that's going to feather on and off. So let's go and take a look at the top and see how this looks while it's recirculating. Okay, so we have this wide open right here. This is the Vorloff return. And then we'll be able to see right there, it's running along the sidewall. Boom ski. So we have that Vorloff going now. We're looking for about 25 minutes on that, just like Jake said. And then along with this, remember we said that we're getting the water in the kettle, ultimately the sparge water that's in the kettle right now, heating up, transferring that over to the HLT, and then that will be our sparge water. So we'll be able to get this louder going, sparge, and we'll keep it rolling like that. Okay, so we're gonna start taking that water from the kettle over to the HLT, and I'm gonna show you how that's built out. Okay, so right here is the kettle, and we're coming out the bottom of the kettle right here, and we're looping back and around over to this pump for the HLT. And you can see that it's going into the face of the pump and then just looping back around, and we're filling this HLT up. One of the reasons why I love getting into different breweries is so I can show you different ways people have of making things work. This is one of those situations where that hot liquor tank doesn't quite have enough of the heating oomph in order to carry out what they need to be doing, so they found an end around on it. Sometimes I think that some of this stuff is some of the more valuable stuff that we cover and things like this, just because it shows different ways people make things work with the situation that they're in. Anyhow, once we get that kettle empty, we're going to be able to start loudering that grain from the mash tun into the kettle. All right, so we're gearing up to switch from Vorloff over to the lauder. And so I had pointed out the Vorloff return valve before, and then if you look over here, there's a corresponding valve for the lauder. So how will this whole thing work?
So basically, it's a continuation of the Vorloff. We're going to continue to drain through and run through the same grant down below. And by switching these two different butterflies over, it diverts it into the boil kettle. Okay. And I'm going to start collecting all of my final wort, hopefully with no grain carryover, that I will get to the boil. I do allow probably about 40 or 50 gallons to collect before I'll turn on my jacket with the direct fire. If you look in there, it's happened before. The floor of it gets a little warped. Yeah. So we're going to hold off for a few minutes, but since we're done, I'm going to swap there and close off my Vorloff return. There is a small slide gate because we whirlpool in this vessel as well. Yep. It kind of blocks and protects debris from going into our eventual knockout. Yep. As best as it can. We do a couple blow-offs as well to make sure we're not pulling debris after our all of our trube settles out inside the kettle from whirlpool. So definitely. Our process here, we collect 380 gallons for a normal 10-barrel batch to allow for evaporation, and then a little bit of schmutz in the bottom of the kettle that we can't pull out. That takes us about an hour and 15 to an hour and a half in total time. The sparge, I do also hold off on sparging until I get a little bit more collected and that level goes down. And do our smaller volumes, because we had a thinner mash, I have a lower volume of sparge water that I'm going to need to bring over, so I don't need to start it right away to keep on my schedule to hit all my times. For sure.
And so you were mentioning, so we're looking at a direct fire kettle, correct?
Yep, direct fire kettle. So we get some unique Maillard reactions compared to a lot of your steam kettles. We do generate a little bit more evaporation and boil off, it seems like, because of that. I'm assuming it's because of that. It's also a little more efficient. Seems like it heats our wort a lot quicker.
Yeah, it gets there, doesn't it? It gets jumping, for sure, for sure.
The one thing related to that I wish we had was an exhaust fan, but it does pretty good. This one's at least facing the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Awesome, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
And then we can see this water. So the wort is actually pumping in along the side here, just like it is on the lauder for the recirc. And then it's collecting here in the bottom. You can see our temp probe right there, our tangential, port, which is for our whirlpool. And then we were talking about a hop dam. Let me see. Let me see if I can see it. Yeah, right over here. We're just about to cover up the little hop dam that will cover that up.
Or doesn't know.
Okay, so we do have a first wort hop edition coming up right here. And what's in here?
All Tetnang.
All Tetnang.
Yep.
Awesome.
3 pounds.
So we'll get this knocked out. Hold on, I'll flip you around. Okay, so we got that Tet first wort hop edition right here. And you can also see that we have our sparge going on over here. And again, something you might not see again or all that often. This is a sweet little sparge rig that I've not seen before. You can see how it attaches right up there with triclover because it's just dumping straight through. We can see we have a flow meter over here. We can control flow rate right there. We're tracking temperature right here. And then this is essentially our sparge head, right? And we're going to be rinsing the top of this grain bed. And we're rolling wort over here. All right, we have all right, we have wrapped up the lauter. We've moved all. How many barrels did we lauter over? Is it like 12 that we put over there?
We go in. Let's see. It's it's actually about 11 3/4 barrels.
Sweet. So just shy of 12 barrels, and then the remaining wort that we have in the grant and mash tun is being dropped to the drain right now. When that is finished draining, we will go ahead and get the grain out of here, and then we'll start rolling through boil. Right now, the kettle is at 177, so we're going to be coming up to a boil, and we're going to be rolling through all that process. So stick with me. All right, I'm going to be graining this out. I'll show you that real quick, and then we'll keep rolling. All right, so we're looking at the 30-minute hop edition for this beer, and that's more Tet?
More Tetnang. We got 2 pounds here, so to add to the 3 pounds for our first wort hop, that'll be going in.
Nice. Nice and nice. Well, sweet, man. I think we're going to sit down with Ryan, talk a little recipe.
The guys at Wire.
by some very German man.
Dornbausch. Wagner Dornbausch is what I imagine his name is.
So this was, you took a lot of inspiration for this beer from that dark lager book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I brewed, so like, I don't know, just kind of like home brewing. You brew beers that you haven't tried.
Yeah.
So you can see what they taste like. And then eventually you get to try other examples of it. So Schwarzbier was always one of the styles I really wanted to try. Mm-hmm. There at the time, this was probably 2020, the first time we brewed, maybe 2019. There was only one other brewery in town that I'd ever had at that time, and
Any classic examples?
Coach Streitzer.
That's
the big one for me, and that was my only example. And by the time I got a lot of them, they were pretty old.
Sure.
But I was really lucky to get my hands on some, relatively fresher ones. And the biggest glaring difference between that like commercial example of a like German Schwarzbier and the ones that I was having that were made here was, well, yeah, they did have roast profile and they had like a little bit of like a chocolate. It was more of it wasn't the front runner. There was honestly no front runner like most German beers. It was all really balanced. So the ones that I had made at that time, I had made one, and the ones that I had tried were either too roasty or too chocolatey or a little too heavy in the finish. So when I almost never brew the same beer twice. I try to make adjustments every time. So yeah, that was kind of the natural evolution of this one is I dropped out some of I think I originally had quite a bit of Cara Munich 2 in it. And while I like Cara Munich 2, it was leaving too much residual sugar and too much body.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a lot of body with dark malts, they kind of blend together and they both carry themselves. And it just felt too roasty, too caramel forward. And those were my first early iterations of Schwarzbier when I was trying.
Yeah, and that is because I remember by me, I mean, Kostritzer was the only or maybe the only one that was around, because when I was first getting in, it was a judging thing for me, right?
Okay.
So I would always go. I was such a big nerd that, like, for competitions, I would harass the judge organizer to let them know what categories I was going to be judging, and then I would have to drive like 3.5 hours to Detroit to judge.
Wow. Okay.
When I started, okay,
you're
so
demands.
I would get a hotel room because I'm 3.5 hours away.
That's fair.
And then I would go out and I would buy classic examples the night before, and I would do score sheets on them in the hotel room.
Oh, you were fresh.
Like I brought glassware because I wasn't going to be doing it out of a plastic cup. So something was not right there. But anyway,
this is the stuff that like
So the alarm just went off on my phone, and so the framing might be a little different. One, but two, the reason that alarm went off is 2:35 every day. So now that I'm stay-at-home dadding, that's when I need to start getting my stuff together to go pick kids up from school.
Okay.
I set that alarm because on my first day that I was supposed to be doing that, I forgot to do it.
Which part? Like the getting them part?
Kids.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
To get kids.
Okay, I thought you meant like,
no.
I forgot to set alarm, so I was rushing. No, I forgot my children.
No, yeah, I forgot my children. I forgot my 5-year-old. So anyways, I mean, no big deal.
But
Clearly this. So anyhow, yes, we were talking about how it was over the edge, like judging stuff for me, but not a style you can get a ton of. And then what I was also really big into Jamil's Brewing Classic Styles.
Love that book.
And when you look at both, there's 2 recipes in there because he found that you essentially, when you would make a lagered porter, people loved it and would give it a gold medal.
Okay.
But there's another more like black pills type approach to it, which is a little bit more what we're talking about today.
Yes,
in that, because I think Kostritzer is, and I'm assuming, I think by the time we get it here, it's probably rounder, dropped off a little bit more, less black pillsy.
Yeah, less hot.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so anyways, and so that's kind of the angle that you're going with this beer that we're going to be making today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. So let's start jumping into, let's just talk about grist right off the top. And if you don't have them in percentages, I will turn them into percentages later. So you could just give me the rundown of what we're looking at grist wise for this beer.
I should give you percentages, and then they'll all be completely wrong. So because my brain doesn't work that way. So we're using, because I can't offer percentages because I don't know offhand. Right now, not right now. We're using Bohemian Floor malted pilsner for the base malt. We really like that malt. It has it's just a little bit rounder and softer. And we like a lot of Fireman's malt products. Yeah. We use them a ton. But for this one, we found actually through brewing Czech pills that it works really well when you kind of up the bitterness a little bit. And it just offers like a good support, which we've done with this. We use floor malted Bohemian Pilsner, and then we use a little bit of a crisp pale chocolate. I want to give you percentages, and I'll provide all the numbers.
You're fine. Yeah.
And then we also use Weyermann Munich 1, which is like that lower SRM. It gives you a little bit of that bread crust, but it's not super honey or sweet like a Vienna malt. And then we use a little bit of Carafa 3 and 2, not dehusked, not Carafa special. We want a little bit of that bitterness, that tannin, that acridness, but not too much. I mean, they're very small percentages.
Sure.
I imagine 2 to 1% of both of those. And then we also use on this one, typically I would use like a Carafoam or a dextrin malt, but being honest, we didn't have it. So I had a little bit of Cara malt, which is once again, crisp Cara malt. So right around, I think that's right around 15 SRM. So I use a little bit of that, probably around 2 or 3%. Once again, all my numbers will be wrong. But that rounds out a little bit and gives you a little bit of that sweetness, but it doesn't really go into that. I don't want it to have like that cherry, that dark fruit.
Sure.
That's not the flavor profile I want for this. I want it to be a black pilsner. I want it to have a little bit of that roast, a little bit of caramel. I put a little bit of Cara Munich 1 in there as well. Honestly, not as complex of a recipe like when you were referencing Jamil saying like a lager porter. When we do our porters, in our stouts, those will have anywhere from 8 to 12 malts in them.
Sure.
And it just feels like a home brewer's delight when you look at it. Because the brewers are so mad that they're weighing out 4 pounds of this. It's great. But with this one, I mean, what did I just say? Like 5 malts total. It's pretty simple. And it's really about dialing in those malt percentages to where you're like, hey, I don't want to overwhelm them with the chocolate. I don't want to overwhelm them with the roast. But I also don't want it to be thin and watery because I'm going to throw a lot of hops at this as well. And when I say hops, I'm referring to noble hops. But yeah, the malt bill's obviously probably the number one aspect of this beer, in my opinion. But yeah, like through iterations, just trying to lower. I don't want it to be super chocolatey. I like pale chocolate from Crisp because it gets into the realm of for me, the way I've always remembered it is chocolate malt from Crisp for me is straight baker's chocolate. It's like real chocolate, but it's also pretty bitter, not very sweet, where I think pale chocolate offers a little bit of that. It's a little bit more rounded. So I get a little more like chocolate ice cream from that malt. And that's what I want. I want a little bit of that like burnt toast, that chocolate, and a touch of caramel to give it a little bit of body and sweetness, but not to where you would ever think this beer isn't like dry. So
you're leveraging an approach that I've talked about before that I'm a very big fan of, and it's combining both husked and dehusked roast malt to kind of dial up that at that point it puts you back on the soundboard, right? Because you're all playing in a dark malt range, but it gives you there's some depth to play with there, right?
They're different,
right? And so, because I've done some things that like I'll joke around and call like a faux stout, where all of the roast is dehusked, So it has that impression, it has the color. But it's way more subtle. And sometimes I like to do that like with an adjunct beer, right? So I have the color, I have some of the roast, but it's not going to smash the adjunct. So it's a way of almost emphasizing adjunct along with a really aggressive malt base, right? Roasted base. But the cool thing with that is you can dial that up and down, right? And so it doesn't all have to be, because a lot of times, even when we think about traditional styles, well, like, dry stout is 100% this roast malt. You can, you can go that way, but you could also, there's some ways to manipulate too by folding that in. So I like that you have a little bit of husked roast malt and then dehusked. And so a lot of times, like with Weyermann, what we're talking about, like with Weyermann, you can get the Carafa Special, and different ones have that as well. But that's the idea. That's what we're referencing. So I like that. And that makes a lot of sense with the grist. And one of the things that I'm going to be interested when, so I will be pulling up a breakdown of the grist, both in pounds, metric, and I'll probably have percentages up there too. I do think the other big thing, and I'm a big believer in when it comes to recipe formulation, is being mindful of that percentage of crystal malt. Because that's something that you can't get over. And like one of the things that I think back to when I think back to maybe some of those 90s style IPAs that were,
C60.
15, 20% crystal malt. And so you have, it's borderline amber. Right. But there's all this residual sweetness that you have to build all this bitterness up to support and play off of. Right. And so, I think when you use a lighter hand with that, you can actually use it to stand up to a little bit more assertive hopping later. Right.
Absolutely.
But you also want to be mindful of it, like you mentioned.
A good example with this beer specifically, there was one time that we brewed it. I think it was the second time I brewed it because I went too heavy on the roast malt. And one of the tricks that I got from Jamil Zane, a chef, I think it was Jamil, it might have been John Palmer, I can't remember exactly. It was doing the, Vorloff edition of a roasted malt. So I'm pulling color, but I'm not pulling flavor. Yeah. And I did that with Schwarzbier, and I didn't pull enough. And I was like, oh, this isn't how I want to. Because that was at the first brewery I ever worked at. We made a red IPA, and that was our hack. It was made with Cara Red, Munich Malt, and two-row, and we added a little bit of Carafa Special 3 in the mash after Vorloff. So just so where it was sparging on top of it, and you were getting a lot of that color contribution, but you were not getting a lot of flavor. Yep. And it's funny because even when I would drink it, I could still smell just a touch of that rose, which I kind of liked. But I tried that with the Schwarzbier once, and it just didn't work. I was like, there's not enough.
Yeah. What about Sinmar? Have you, like the liquid product from Wireman, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've used that. So fun story. One of my first beers I made here back in 2018, I tried to make a red hazy IPA, which, we didn't really know a lot about hazy IPAs at that point. And it was just brown. And oh man, it was awful. It tasted so good, but it looked
so terrible. Dude, it had to have. Okay, I did not have the beer, but just you saying, and this is, it's big of you to bring up because like we've all found things over the years that we didn't understand the concept to, and we're like, yeah, let's go do this. Yeah. But yeah, just the idea of saying red with that haze. Right. Well, because I love dark Hefeweizen. Dunkelweizen. Yeah. But you have to be all right with the fact that it kind of looks gross. Like that's not a beautiful beer in the glass. It's not. That's true. You know what I mean? I love it. Yeah. Like I love those flavors. But anyways, you were saying. I
did underestimate the consumer's distaste for an ugly beer. Like even if it tasted well, it's like, oh, hey, I remember that beer. It had a ton of mosaic. But it looked like diarrhea water. It was awful. It was so bad.
I didn't want to say it, but that's good.
It looks like someone shit in a cup. And no one wants to drink that. So. Or at least no one wants to be seen drinking it. You know what I mean? It's cool if it's like a butterfly pea. Like, oh, your beer's purple. You're drinking something that's gonna.
Oh, that's funny. So, that's funny.
Yeah, I digress. But Sinmar, I've definitely used. I've used it a couple times. Harder to dial in than I thought it would be because there are certain things that you can plug in a recipe into a brewing software and it's like, oh, it's going to give you this SRM. But there are ranges on all those SRMs or Lovabond or EBC or whatever. And you have to take that into consideration. So there are times where I used Cinnamar once to make a red IPA and it turned brown. Yeah. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah. And but I've used it with success since then. And it's a really cool tool. I've used it for black IPAs as well. And I also use it for there was it was like a dark Vienna style lager, and it was just a little off. It was a little too pale, so we added a little bit of that as well. But yeah, it's cool. Comes in a yellow. Okay. It's pretty neat. Red Cap's super on brand for environment. Yeah, it's awful. Ugly, but,
I've dropped that red ring, the break off ring. Yeah. One of my most recent breweries. Okay. Took the cap off, and I'm like, I'm not going to measure that. Like, there was 1 liter left. I needed 1 liter. Yeah. I'm like, why am I going to measure this into a cup? Right. Like, I know for a fact because I measured it all. I knew exactly how much was left in the container. I'm like, I'm not going to measure this again. I'm just going to pour this in. Okay. So I pour it in, and then the black break off ring from that falls into the kettle. And if I had to tell you the volume of anxiety that riddled my body, because this was at a place that was very highly automated. Yeah. And and so I will say that that there were some unexpected outcomes. Okay. Okay. What? There was some unexpected outcomes toward the tail end of knockout. Yeah. And because with this automated system, one function ends. There's a sensor that's going to say, okay, we're past clear work. Okay. Now this is going to close. This is going to open. All these other things are going to happen. Okay. And that thing ended up being sucked into one of the knockout ports in the kettle and actually got tied up in the face of the pump. Oh, and so that's cool. We ended up breaking it down and like pulling it out. I mean, we were just guessing that's where it was. And anyway, so
got lucky.
anyways, that was my semi nightmare story. But
that reminds me of a time I was CIP in a tank and I kept getting pump cavitation. I couldn't figure it out. And I'd walk the lines out and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And then I disconnected it and I was like seeing if something was lodged in my dump port on the bottom of the fermenter, and it was a gasket that had lodged itself. That when I was CIP in the tank or saying in the tank, I must have somehow dropped a 1.5 inch tri-clamp gasket in there. And I was like, there's no one else to blame but myself. So.
Well, okay, so we've talked grist and kind of how we're looking at building out that residual sweetness. Right. And then we're saying, target ABV on a beer like this is what?
Target ABV on this beer is right around 5%.
Okay.
So I don't.
And so that starting gravity is where, and then kind of where are we hoping for that?
Oh, God, I'm not full of shit. Okay, good. 11.9 is what I'm shooting for. I work in Play-Doh.
Yep.
So I used to be a gravity boy.
Yep.
But not anymore.
Yep.
Would that be like 1048 or
something like that? Yeah, maybe.
So and then
I'll run the numbers.
No, run the numbers. I just imagine Seth Green in the back of a van, like hacking into a traffic light. I don't know why. Sorry. 11, 9, 12 Play-Doh. We're shooting for a finished Play-Doh right around 2.5, right around 5.1%. I don't want it to be big. I want people to be able to drink several of them, but I don't want it to be. Like every brewer knows, when you start to get below 4.5%, it becomes very hard to make a balanced beer. The British do it wonderfully, but I want this beer right around 5%.
Okay. So full disclosure, one, I'm not a good listener in the first place.
Okay.
And two, in a scenario like this, I am asking questions and also trying to think about the direction going forward. Right.
That's hard.
So I'm not saying that's hard.
I am.
Well, I'm not saying that's hard, but I am saying I didn't hear you when you said what's the finishing gravity or Play-Doh on this.
Right around 2.3.
2.3. Okay.
So, that's what we're
Relatively dry.
Relatively dry.
Yeah, relatively dry. Yep.
Yeah.
Which and I think you need to be in that space.
Yeah.
In order for, I think it's a drinkability issue.
Yeah, man. I don't want this beer to linger. I want to drink it. I want to taste it. I want it to be dry, and then I want to drink another one.
And not to say that if you have a beer that finishes at 3 Play-Doh, 10, 12, that it couldn't be perfectly drinkable based on your water profile, hopping, X, Y, and
Absolutely.
Z. Not that, but with the way you're building it, that's the way you want that to be.
Yeah, based
and that
on
makes sense.
The malts that we're using, the bitterness I'm trying to attain, and then my starting gravity versus my finishing. That's where we want it.
Sure.
Yeah, well said. Because, I've definitely had beers that are higher finishing gravity. They're more crushable. So.
Do you have one thing we didn't talk about, and we mentioned a little bit? I know that we mashed in today at 149.
Oh yeah.
Then hit that right on the head, nailed it. Beautiful. So we know we're going with that lower mash temp, creating the more fermentable sugars in the mash.
Yeah.
But what about water? Because we had not talked about water very much with this. Do you have you would know what we added because you did adjust pH with acid, correct?
Yep.
Phosphoric acid. Yep. And we're kind of targeting a pH with that mash right around where?
Yeah, so a pH on this type of beer, we want it to be right around 5.2. Okay. I don't want it to get below 5.
Yep.
But like we get a little bit of help from those dark malts.
Yep.
And so our groundwater here starts at right around 9. Mm-hmm. It fluctuates obviously throughout the year, but and we titrate every quarter, every time we get a new water report. But right now we're adding about 0.25 mils per gallon of 85% food grade phosphoric acid. We like our water to start around 6 pH. Mm-hmm. That's what we shoot for. 6 pH brewing water, and then I'm wanting right around 5 to 5.2 pH for my mash. Our brewing water's really good. You're familiar with our brewing water. Yep. It's pretty middle of the road in most areas. Our calcium levels are a little bit low, so we add a little bit on this one. We don't do much. We add a little bit of chloride and a little bit of sulfate. We split up the additions between the mash tun and the kettle. Yep. I base it off of
brewing water.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it says yellow dry in the recipe because
yellow dry, baby.
Brewing water. It's a great resource that I've been using for. I mean, I've been home brewing since 2010, so 15 years. That's weird.
Yeah.
So that was something I found as a home brewer, and like most things that you start as a home brewer, you don't think it's going to translate to pro brewing, and it absolutely does. I still use Beersmith. I still use brewing water. But I wanted a yellow dry. That was kind of the profile I was shooting for, because it seems easy, like, oh, we should go for something that complements the dark malts. But once again, I want a dry finish. I don't want so that's kind of something I think that's pretty fun.
And then so jumping into the hop side of things, and then we'll talk yeast fermentation a little bit. What kind of IBU are you building into this beer, and ballpark? Because I know, are we running Tet?
Yeah. So we're
Tettinger?
Yeah. So we're doing quite a bit of Tettinger. This is a fun beer in that way. When you get used to making hazy IPAs forever, and you're just doing like Whirlpool editions, it's kind of fun to bring an older like German style beer back, and it's like, oh, hey, there's that first wort hop, which I love first wort hop editions. It's a finer bitterness. At least I read that one somewhere. So I'm still shooting for right around 30 IBU on this beer, which doesn't sound that bitter, but when there's not a lot else going on, we're getting, and two, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. The quality of bitterness changes. Like, I can get 30 IBU with Magnum pretty easily, and I can just throw it into an addition at the beginning and be done with it. But I'm using an extremely low acid hop that allows me to throw a ton of like vegetal material into my beer, and I think that creates in some ways like a much rounder and fuller bitterness. I mean, I would never want to use Tettinger for an IPA. That beer would just taste like vegetal broccoli water. It'd be terrible. But I like that we're adding a ton of hops between the first wort hop, the 30, the 15, and we do a little bit in the Whirlpool as well. But I like that bitterness. It almost starts to. This sounds. It's like not a nice word, or not a nice descriptor. There's almost like a coarse bitterness to it that I get out of like a really nice German Pils that I love.
I've heard some people talk about like because I think we're talking a polyphenol game.
Yeah,
right now.
Absolutely.
And so like maybe texture.
Yeah.
Is like a better sounding word for it, because we're kind of talking around. Maybe it is like a texture thing that you feel as if you're getting out of those multiple additions through there.
That's a better word too, because I also use the word fine and then coarse, and that's kind of contradictory. But it's true, because like when I would drink really good German Pilsners, that I was like, why can't I replicate this? It is almost like a coating on the tongue that it leaves, especially when they're fresh, and they're a really rounded bitterness. It's not like just down the center of your palate. It's like on the side of your tongue. And that's one of the reasons I like beer. I think it's challenging. I think beer should be challenging in some ways. The first time I drank a beer, I thought it was disgusting, but I wanted to know why. I thought it was terrible. And then here I am. I like to layer in. I mean, the first brewery I worked at, that was in 2016, 15. And we were doing a lot of West Coast IPAs, and we were layering hops. It was a 60 and a 45 and a 15 and a
in those
30.
days.
Dude, you miss those additions. When I drink, like, I love hazy IPA, but when I drink a hazy IPA, I miss that 15-minute addition. I want to taste that bitterness that you get from the hot side, and it's very distinct. And it's one of the things I love about like European noble style lager. So
there was this is probably nothing that I'll use, but that same hazy roundtable was saying more people were talking about 5 to 10 IBU at 60 in the kettle.
5 to 10 IBU.
5 to 15. I'm sorry.
Okay.
5 to 15 IBUs at 60.
Interesting.
Because they said it just needs the structure.
Buddy,
the structure.
I agree, and like I feel like I hate to be that guy. It's like, oh well, they're doing it the way I'm doing it, so it must be right.
Yeah.
Like there are times that you say that. I was brewing hazy IPAs for a long time with just Whirlpool editions. Yeah. And then we started like messing around with like bigger finishing gravities, so higher starting gravities. And in my opinion, it was just never enough. So I started finding like a few, like Nugget. I love Nugget on the hot side, especially. And I would just start throwing a couple pounds at 60. And I feel like it gave it more structure. And it just didn't feel as flabby. And it's like, oh, I don't know.
Flabby is the right word.
Yeah. So that resonates with me big time.
Yeah.
I love hot side.
Yeah.
Hops. I like local too.
But. Okay. So there's kind of the kind of wrapping up the hot side of things, right? What was do you have IBU volumes or do you have any IBU numbers or hop volumes?
IBU number, I lied again. Right, this is saying right around 20. I can double check that, but I mean, this is also, I updated based on the alpha acid. I know the alpha acid of our 10 inch right now is 1.4.
It's so low. Yeah, there's so many low.
So I'm doing 3 pounds at first wort. I'm doing another 2 pounds at 30. And then I'm doing another 1.25 at 15. And then having a little fun, throwing a little Eldorado in the whirlpool.
Yeah, baby. How much Eldorado in the whirlpool?
Eldorado in the whirlpool, right? Not much, 1.25 pounds. And the way we whirlpool editions, this is one of the things I would have liked to have known when I first got into pro brewing or even home brewing, because I had no concept of what whirlpool editions were when I was a home brewer. The way we whirlpool might be different than the way other people do. So I will get my whirlpool going after knockout, not after knockout, after boil, we'll get our whirlpool going. I don't tend to throw my whirlpool editions in until I get like 5 minutes into my whirlpool edition. So we do a 10-minute whirlpool rest, but I don't throw my hops in. I really want it moving before I throw my hops in typically. I used to wait till my whirlpool was completely done and then I would throw the additions in. And that does have some impact on bitterness. We whirlpool in our kettle over here. So there's not as much temperature drop as we would see over at our production brewery where we have a separate whirlpool vessel. So we're still whirlpooling over here at right around 205. So it's still pretty warm. So we get a lot of IBU, but we wanted to throw, I like a little bit of Eldorado in there because we were talking about this earlier. There are some hops that I feel like they do more than just add flavor and aroma. I feel like they add a little bit of texture as well. And Eldorado is one of those for me. Well, without being overbearing, because like you'll try this beer and you would never think there was any like fruited American hops in it. So.
Well, and the other thing is too, this is a little bit of pub life too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
where it's a pub sized batch. You know what I mean? And it's you're free to try some different things.
Yeah,
you know what
I'm a pub brewer through and through. That's what I've spent most of my career doing. So like we were talking about it earlier. There are times I look at recipes. I'm like, why did I do this? Some of my first hazy IPAs, they were all like Golden Promise base malt. Like, why?
Well, because you want it to be awesome.
Yeah,
and that's an awesome malt.
That's an awesome malt.
So I mean. And
it's just funny. And I had that feeling when I was looking at this recipe. I was like, why did I throw it on a Oh yeah, I remember why. Yeah. But it took me a minute. But
all right. So before we jump back into the brewery to wrap this brew day up, we're going to be getting, I saw some 3470 back there.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be fermenting with 3470. We're going to be getting into the fermenter there. What temp do you like to run those ferments at with 3470?
Cold. I like them real cold. Anywhere from 48 to 50. I like to keep them super cold. I've had some pretty good lager throughout my life, fortunately, and like the ones that I tend to like, and I've been fortunate enough to read about the recipes and the other brewers have shared their process. A lot of them for me that I like keep their fermentation really cold. Like I don't do diac rests. I don't ever raise the temp.
So it's a set it and forget it at 50F?
Set it and forget it at 50F. Like right now, it's January. It's super easy for us. In the summer, it's really hard for us to get it that cold into knockout. But it's just a really gentle, slow fermentation. And it's really neutral and super. And that's a great yeast. It's like, it doesn't get in the way in a lot of ways. It adds a little bit of a sulfur component, but not too much. The only other thing that we do that's kind of interesting is we spun, and we've been spunning lager here for at least like 4 or 5 years. I try to wait till at least, I try to hit it right around 3 or 4 Plato above termo. That's where I try to get on our spunning mill. We don't always hit it perfectly. But yeah, so 3470 kept really cold, spun it towards the latter third part of fermentation. And, we don't crash it until it passes IAC, and sometimes that takes longer than others, but the spunning helps for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Keep it cold, man.
Well, nice.
I like it.
Well, I think that's it. Do you want to jump back in the brewery?
Yeah, dude, let's do it.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, man.